Hey, what's going on, guys? Phil here. Welcome back to another podcast, this time sitting down with Bearclaw. This is actually going to be a new series of podcast I do with Cauldron members to sort of talk about Mechwarrior Online and the balance changes that are being brought to you guys on patches, and also just sort of future talk too, because some of these topics that we're going to talk about in this podcast are pretty game changing, if you will. And I feel like you needed to know that this was actually happening and or at least being talked about behind the scenes, because I just found out last week and sort of took my breath away is because it's that big of a deal. Also, just to sort of break the ice between the community and the Cauldron, because I sometimes feel like there is a breakdown in communication there. And if anything, the Cauldron is the community and part of the community and is there to help work for the community. So I feel like this is much needed and long time due. So anyways, I will be doing this at least once a month, possibly even after patches, so we can talk about what the next month is going to bring and what's going on, and of course ask the why did those changes happen, and to at least get that information. You may not agree with the stuff that's happening, but at least you know what their thoughts are. So that being said, I'd like to also give a quick and huge shout out to my patron podcast sponsors. Shout out to Chad, Downtime, and McJiggles. Thank you again, guys, for all the support you guys give over on Patreon. I do appreciate it. And speaking of, if you guys want to help support this podcast or what I do, consider becoming a patron. I'll have links down below. I'll also have links for the Cauldron's public Discord server that you should join, especially after hearing this discussion. Be a part of the discussion, and let's get this moving forward. So without further ado, let's go dive in here. Again, my guest, Bearclaw. Do you like large desk mats? No guts, no galaxy.net. All right. First off, for those that don't know, this is Bearclaw. By the way, I've never asked you, where did your moniker, alias, pseudonym, whatever we're calling it, where'd that come from?
Oh man, that's a long story. You remember when I first showed up? It was like some goofy name. I forget. It was like it started as. Oh man,
Is it like a troll name or something? Like a
I don't even remember. I think I just picked a random one that like Twitch gave me, and then after a while, I was like, this isn't gonna work. But I was like, okay, if it's already food related, so why don't we jump on something else food related? So I grabbed like the first two syllables, word that was food, and I was like, oh, okay, it sticks.
Gotcha.
The
Appropriate.
underscore and the letters, the numbers came later, but yeah, it was like,
Understood. All right. So for those that don't know, Bearclaw has been at the head or one of the head guys over at the Cauldron, and I think this was like overdue. So like, what is this podcast going to be about? I'll sort of elaborate and just keep it simple here. I feel like there's a communication gap between the changes that are happening in the game via the Cauldron and the community at large. And sometimes when there isn't communication, that creates a void. And if that void isn't filled, it gets filled with, whatever. And I've seen a lot of sort of sort of like Cauldron and comp. I've seen that sort of edge back into the conversation. And I don't think that's healthy. And a lot of the times, I would say majority of the time, a lot of it doesn't really have any truth to it. And so I reached out to you. I feel I probably should have done this a long time ago. I'm going to have you obviously today. Possibly even like Krasno, Pesky in the future. Matt and Darren may also be involved sometimes. But in particular, one thing that I think is really important is the Cauldron works for the community. And so they're the voice and sort of the push of the community. So that's where this podcast and what it is and the direction for you're wondering. And I feel like it's sort of overdue. So that all being said, how do you feel about some of the communication, with the community? Is that one thing that you've already had to sort of deal with and stuff like that? So let's go just like get that out in the air. Like, do you feel like that could be improved? Are you guys happy? Like, do you, obviously you guys got a Discord too, and shout out to Magic Pangla for giving me the public Cauldron Discord, which you can get on there and everybody can talk and discuss as well. But let's just sort of talk about that in particular. How do you feel about communication from Cauldron, PGI, the community, so forth?
oh man, it's a bit of a long story because, it's like, do you want to just harness the power of the brown sea? It's kind of scary doing that because there's a lot of stuff. There's very divisive people on the forums on the website. So it's like, okay, well, what about streamers, and their communities? But it's kind of, I guess what ended up happening is it started like our feedback Discord for the public or the community at large sort of started as a channel on the comp Discord of MWO. And then, all the stuff from there started leaking into the other channels of that Discord. And I think Krasno runs that Discord, and he kind of told me it's like, hey, all this stuff is spilling over. Like it's time to make our own Discord. So we had a discussion. We sat down and we basically just sat there and found some moderators, and that was kind of the birth of the feedback Discord. And as you saw, it's kind of full of basically everything we're talking about. Well, most of the public topics that we're talking about in the Cauldron, now they're there, and the community can kind of interact with it. But yeah, the first few months of that, it was very shaky because trolls would come in, start saying random stuff. You have to ban them, have to deal with a few people that just kept causing issues, and eventually, things sort of petered out, and more people started showing up, and more communication started coming out. And now we're sort of at the stage where, we have Tios in there. They're our newest PGI employee. He's in there now, talking on the regular to people, which is cool. But yeah, it's come a long way. But I mean, my personal feelings about it is it's always scary trying to, sort of bridge the gap between the community and say a group like the Cauldron, because you know how divisive this community can get when they don't get their way or they don't know what's going on. And yeah, it's been shaky, but I think it's worked out for the most part. I don't know, 750 members on a Discord, it sounds like it worked.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, and sort of where all this came in is one of the topics that we're going to be talking about. But let's just say a balance X decision, and dropping and streaming. Someone said, like, I feel like the decisions are just being made for like competitive players, and it sort of shook me because I was like, well, can you elaborate? Because I don't really see it that way. Because if you guys make a change to a weapon, and in this case, this had to do with like, hags. Okay, do you want a pinpoint sort of long range weapon, or do you, like? And I was like, well, regardless if, let's just say, a comp uses it or not, or it's effective, I was like, you have just as much ability to use the weapon in that way too. And so it sort of struck me, the more and more we dove into the conversation on stream, it wasn't necessarily that they felt like comp was getting their way, and I've seen this throughout the years. I mean, me and you've talked about like probably numerous times of like, I don't buy into the whole like, oh well, the Cauldron's just making the game for comp players. I think that's a scapegoat term used, and it's a way to sort of deflect, like, oh, things aren't how I wanted them, so ergo they're the problem. They're making the game like worse or
blame
whatever.
the other guy, right?
Yeah. And I mean, regardless, that's sort of why I felt like this conversation, not to like point fingers at whoever or whomever, but it's the fact of like, I don't see it that way, because like the majority of competitive players I talk to, like they want as many weapons as possible to be able to use, and they want as many mechs to be able to use. I think the issue really when we dove into it was, you run into sometimes comp groups and they're good, and you run into 4 of them and they're set up in a particular, maybe range bracket, long range, and then you get a map that's also long range, and it's just, it can go downhill from there. Yeah.
It's like how do I
But that's not the comp player's fault. And that's like matchmaker, that's the map design. I would say actually those are probably the 2 biggest things. So anyways, I just wanted to sort of again break the wall down. I just don't think that's fair. And how I've always sort of viewed the comp scene throughout my years, I wish this would have been done earlier, but I look at a really, really good group of people as a way to show you how your game can be broken. And then you have to ask, are you happy with that end result? What does that mean? If I tell you, hey, here's Crimson Straight, Team A, Team B, go forth, and hey, why does Team B keep winning? Like, well, okay, well, they get control of the island. They have long sight lines to be able to cover pass, and also the city part and underpass, and so the other side doesn't really have that ability. Okay. It takes your top level players being able to point that out. That's how I've always viewed sort of comp players to give feedback. Not necessarily like, hey, I want this mech or this weapon should do X, Y, or Z damage, but it's like, why does that weapon keep, like, why aren't we seeing, UAX, or why aren't we seeing SRMs, or why aren't we seeing X-Pulse, and asking those questions, and then you get that feedback, and you're like, oh, it's because those other weapons are a little bit too strong. Okay, are they too strong in the burst? Are they too strong in the DPS or the alpha? And then as a designer, you could make adjustments and go from there. Same thing with like maps or whatever. That's how I feel like the communication between devs and comp players should have been years ago, and I think that would have probably helped things or whatever. But in the forms of the Cauldron was formed for the community, you guys to be able to do the balanced decisions for the game. And I've said this time and time again, I think the game's in a really good spot as far as balance. It goes through its slight shifts as far as like
whether there's fluctuation.
Yeah,
it's never perfect, but
yeah,
it's like we try our best to not burn the damn thing to the ground.
yeah.
So
I mean, we don't have just heavy peeps dominating. You don't have just ER peeps dominating or Goss or whatever. And then of course, when like new weapons are introduced, I think sometimes it gets a little bit overblown because everybody's testing them out. So of course you're going to see everything and everyone's going to be running them. But one of the topics, that I wanted to touch base was, and this is sort of what stemmed all this, was someone asked me, hey, I've heard a rumor that they may be changing clan double heat sinks. And I said, no, I don't know anything about that. Well, what about it? And one of the, it was basically to the effect of, hey, they're thinking about reducing the capacity, which is the ability as you add heat sinks past the engine cap. So of course that's 10, unless it has more in the engine and they're locked in omnis. Once that's past 10, that it adds capacity and it allows huge alphas to be able to happen. So I was like, oh, that's interesting because that's not a new topic.
No, it's old.
Yeah, it's really
old.
It's been proposed 16, 17 maybe, as probably even further back then. Because clans were what, 14, 15, something like that. So, okay, so what's going on? Where is this conversation? Is there truth to it? Which I know we talked about this on stream, but that's why I wanted to cover it up. So, what's going on? Why are you guys talking about reducing clan alpha capability, and why now, and what?
I think the biggest thing that's changed is there's finally someone at PGI that's sort of been in the trenches with us. So, that's Tios basically. And he comes along and, he's combing through all the stuff in the Cauldron Discord and all the old conversations. And he's like, hey, what's up with the clan double heat sinks? And, one day he's like, hey, here's a number. We can change this. What do you guys think? And, most of the time, if it's not a big change, no one, panics. But this is pretty big. So his initial proposal was to drop the clan capacity to 0, which is it's really big. I think right now
that means every heatsink past the internal wouldn't be adding any.
Yeah.
Correct?
So I think the conversation went, someone said it was too much, and Navid proposed a slightly less aggressive buff, or less aggressive change, I guess I should say. And I think the main thing was that it was initially planned for October by Tios. He was like, hey, let's just push this in and see what happens, kind of deal. And everyone was like, oh my god, what? It's the middle of, the WC. This is sort of like when Chris and Paul dropped the skill tree on MRBC during that, I think it was season 9 of MRBC, and I kind of paralleled that to it, and there were a lot of people that were really unhappy with this idea. So, I mean, it's still going to happen, but we delayed it until December. So, in order to how do I say, in order to just kind of keep the conversation going and see where it goes. And usually comp is over before the December patch, so it's a much safer spot to do that. And also, I think there was a conversation earlier about cool shots, and I was thinking, it's like, hey, what if we did cool shots in November? What if we change those first? And then we go back to the discussion about, the clan double heat sinks. So maybe we don't have to just nuke the thing from orbit to get,
Yeah.
our desired result. Because again, cool shots are sort of the the behind, these high alpha builds, and their frequency of use is like, okay, you can pop out of cover, dump a load of alpha, it's like get to 80%, pump your cool shot, hide for a second, and come back and do it again. And I feel like there's more to it than just the clan double heatsink, and
Yeah.
that's currently where we're at with it. Is we're sort of like, okay, it's on the horizon, but there are other systems that are involved that we could also look at in terms of, say, pumping the brakes on all this high alpha stuff that's been happening. It's usually a case of hardpoint inflation, all the mechs and the legendary builds, all the stuff that's been coming out recently. It's got a ton of hardpoints on it, and there's really nothing stopping these people from spamming cool shots, spamming clan double heat sinks, this, that, and the other. And it's like, yeah, it's getting pretty spicy out there. It's like you can't take a medium mech without getting instantly halved or so, and that's sort of where we're at right now.
Okay, so there's a few things to dissect there. So you guys were considering pushing this. You're holding off. I know there's a vote on the Discord. You guys have. There's a vote. You can vote. When you say get rid of capacity for the double heat sinks, we'll come back to the cool shots and stuff, because I feel like that's a important discussion. I feel like it's really important for people to understand what you're talking about is basically a game design system, which is basically saying that you being able to add a heatsink, whether it's clan or IS, gives you an additional dissipation rate to your mech increase, and a basically a capacity, which is basically like a cup. It makes your cup bigger to where you can fire, and it takes longer to fill up, basically, as far as that cup. The issue then is alphas, and this isn't a new issue, though, let's be fair. I mean, alphas used to be, back in the day, a 35 pinpoint alpha back in IS days before clans were introduced or it was 30 or 35 for pinpoint, and I think around 40, 45 for like others, and that was like AC20s and SRMs or whatever, right? Like back in the day. But once clans came along, things ramped up drastically and stuff. So you guys feel that alphas are too strong. And just to clarify, you're also a comp player, and you have comp players, and comp players are saying, hey, just FYI, like, this is getting out of hand. The timing sort of isn't lost upon me. I mean, hags come out and you basically have builds that can do like 130 plus sustainable like alphas. So did this discussion seriously start before hags, or this is just like, hey, like, we have to make a change because like future legendaries or whatever things are just going to get even weirder?
I think it started way before that. I mean, even prior to the whole Legends thing showing up, it's just that, even back then, alphas were getting to this point where it's like, okay, you're seeing, triple heavy large lasers, 6 ER mediums, or, some combination of 2 large pulse, 6 ER mediums, plus a heavy large laser. And it's like, what is all this? Like the vomit started to get to a really serious point, and then, the Legends come out, everybody's freaking out about, oh my god, the clan legends, they're going to be crazy because they're all, battle mechs, and, there's all these new hard points and stuff. And then, icing on the cake was the new weapons. But this conversation had been ongoing, but I don't think anyone really took it seriously until, they started to see the inflation of hardpoints go up. And then it was like, oh, hey, this is this is getting interesting.
Gotcha. So this is player behavior then, is like, hey, we don't want that ability to just alpha large alphas. You're okay with like alphas, but it shouldn't be, you want to curb basically the damage output that's sustainable alphas. Like, and so I've heard numbers tossed around like 70, but then it depends on the weapon systems again, because like, again,
Right,
if you're,
right.
like
Brawling and,
yeah, like, um, are you going to have to increase dissipation of clan heat sinks to compensate, or is that still, that number's just as fine? Because I'm looking at it as like, okay, the dissipation's here, plus the combo of the capacity, it allows for some pretty big stuff to happen, because as you're firing, you're also still dissipating in your capacity, and it's all this weird sort of things going on behind the scenes. And I'm just thinking, like, if you get rid of the capacity drastically, do you have to compensate? Because in my head, I'm just thinking player behavior. Like, what does this do to alphas? Like, does it just basically say, hey, I'm just going to drop it down to, 70 laser vomit alpha every single time, which is about what my Timby is already. Let's be honest, with 2 large pulse and 6 ER mediums is around there.
it's still like a decent amount of damage.
Yeah. So that would basically mean is like, I'd be really top. I mean, I would be going from like a 50 some odd percent. Now I'm going to be up to like 90 something percent on an alpha. But then, that dissipation rate would be the same as it was before, but my capacity, it's just one of those things where I'm interested to, that's going to open the door to counterplay quite a bit.
Yeah,
That's
a bit of a
that's what I'm interested in. And with like the scale shot, which is already stupid, and we'll get into that,
God.
Mech.
Yeah.
But that in my head is like, okay, so you guys are fixing a big issue, which I think is a valid concern. But I guess I'm just looking at from like, what's behind that? Because like, as soon as you guys change a, Pop Tart goes away, something fills the void. You curb laser vomit, then something fills void. So I'm just curious to know, like, if you're not going to increase dissipation, what is that going to do to, like, in my head, you would have to do a weapon rebalance as well as clans, right?
Yeah, but usually, well, a new trend that's been happening in the Cauldron is we're usually like looking at one particular variable. We'll adjust something and then watch what happens. We've started to learn that, tweaking a couple of knobs at the same time is not a great idea.
Sure.
Because sometimes it reverses the effect of what you're trying to get at. So, I think our
Muddies the
focus,
water so you can't see clearly. Like, was
yeah.
it that variable or was it this variable?
How many variables did we touch?
Yeah.
What exactly happened? And then this leads to just a very, very infuriating discussion about, okay, let's reverse this change, adjust that one, change this one. And it's like, no, we changed one thing and we're observing exactly what's happening with this one particular change. So I think our initial change is going to be for capacity, at least if I'm not mistaken. I may be mistaken in a couple months, but our initial view is capacity, because capacity is sort of like, how you said dissipation sort of, it's the speed at which it reduces heat, right? It dissipates the heat, but capacity is sort of that, say for example, 3 PPCs, you can get to 96% heat on an alpha, and then say the dissipation changes happens, and now that percentage changes, and now it's
Yeah.
either just at 100 or just over.
Yeah, because
right?
you've been, yep. I see what you mean.
Because that's the capacity, but the dissipation remains the same. And now we can, when we change the capacity, now we can see, okay, is this enough, right? Do we have to change anything else afterwards? And that sort of gives a clear picture.
Is this equal across the board though in all clan mechs? Because like, I feel like really what we're talking about is mechs that can like carry a metric ton of heat sinks. Because like, I'm looking at like, I don't know, the Cougar or Incubus or Mistlink, or like the smaller, even some of the mediums, where it's like you're not putting 20, 22, 26 heat sinks like you can on like the Supernova or the Mark II or stuff like that. I mean, so I'm just curious, do you feel like that nerf I mean, I can see some mechs benefiting, like the Incubus, maybe. Like, there's a few I think would still do quite well.
I think
Um,
the initial concern is like, okay, it's the clan double heatsink, right? It's not just clan double heatsinks for lasers. It's clan double heatsinks across the board. And now that's a really big consideration, and that's sort of what shut down the conversation. The first few times it came up, it's like, hey, it's not just changing for laser vomit. Everything's being affected,
yeah,
and now that's like come full circle, and now we're seeing is it's like, hey, alpha strikes are getting even larger now, and it's like it's like the perfect time to just you know curve that off, curve the extremes that are happening now.
it's interesting because like someone could be saying, well, what's the advantage then of running clan versus IS, especially with IS so many mechs having giga quirks, if you will. I mean, look at the awesome AQ, or it'll be interesting seeing. I'm not opposed to this. I think it's an interesting concept and it'll be interesting testing. And obviously this has to be live because there's not going to be a
Oh
PTS. We
yeah,
are the PTS, right?
yes, we are the
Um,
PTS.
it'll be interesting. Do you feel that there may be a shakeup for a month of like, I mean, what are you like? What are your thoughts? Like your like projections? Like, are you guys thinking like, yeah, this is because if you're running some of those builds, are you gonna break up your fire as an assault on that direwolf? Like instead of dual hag 30, dual heavy large laser, and 6 ER mediums, you can alpha and get to like I don't know, it's like in the 80 or something percentage. From a player behavior standpoint, do I just take that second to fire the left, then fire the right? Like how? I don't know, man. I feel like that's just gonna
Yeah,
it's gonna change some builds.
I think I can only speak for myself at this point in the cauldron, because like there are so many different views on this. Navid thinks wildly different than I do. So I mean, for me, it's like as long as we can sort of break up that idea of just here, let me unload 100 damage on you,
Yeah,
and then you're dead. That's like, I find that really dumb. When I pop out of cover and then I get shot at by one person, and now I'm basically dead.
yeah,
I've also done that in the past to other people. This poor kid fox comes out of cover. I've got 6 ER mediums, 2 heavy large, and I just look at him, and he explodes. And it's like
yeah,
that guy was in the match for a minute and 30 seconds, and now he's back in the mech lab. Like
yeah.
that's kind of vicious, honestly. But I think my predictions is, maybe it won't stop people from bringing those weapons, but it might, you know, cause some slowdown with what they're doing. And maybe that doesn't solve the issue entirely, but maybe they think twice about firing all their guns, or firing that amount of weapons. it,
Yeah.
it might help in terms of you know not dying as fast, but I think, gosh, I'm so fixated on the cool shots, but I feel like
Yeah,
having
we
that on top is sort
yeah.
of the icing on the cake for
Well,
me.
so let me there's two things there. One, we're talking about clan double heat sinks.
Right,
Are there
right.
any changes going to happen to inner sphere side of things? Cuz like there are a few setups that can do some pretty substantial damage,
Oh
like
yeah.
again, so I think it'll bring some. I mean, even the Stalker 4N being able to fire four, binaries, like it's still like a 76 alpha, and that's around what the Timby is right now too. So
Mhm.
like, do you feel that I mean, I guess you'd have to look at the numbers of like, I was talking about this on stream. Like, even if you took a Timberwolf and you swapped just inner sphere heat sinks on one, the clan one's still better just because you can't even do that. Just
Sheer amount.
yeah, the sheer amount, but just the three crit slots. That's another thing too. I think like you could have the exact same dissipation and capacity, but the clan one being two crit slots is huge. Because I mean, how many crit slots is that when you have six extras? I mean, like that's a substantial amount of extra crit slots you don't have to invest for clan. So like, that is what the difficult thing between having two like tech bases, and it's
Yeah,
like
I've always found that difficult. It's like we have two different kinds of heat sinks. Like it'd be nice if we just had a heat sink, and it was just uniform in terms of, okay, I have 20 heat sinks or I have 30.
yeah,
There's like God, that was what Mechwarrior 4
Four
mercenaries
did
did.
a good,
Yeah,
yeah. You
just
could, yeah. I was about to
everything
say,
everything across the board was just uniform. The armors, the structures, the engines, the heat sinks. Dude, it was great. It's great when you have a nice even foundation.
yeah. And I know like some people are like, "Mer, there's supposed to be a difference." It's like, no, I mean, yeah, but also it's supposed to be the Warriors, and anyways.
It's like Malore,
Yeah.
it just gets in the way. And
Okay.
that's I know
So,
I know this is off topic, but like whenever I bring up IS Omnis, the first thing someone says, but the engines are locked. They're all XL locked engines. What's the big deal? And I'm just like, come on, really?
we'll
Still
see.
stuck on this.
In lore, IS Omnis don't die to a side torso blowout. That's a game rule. That's literally just a game rule.
Right.
Like that's a so you can change that behavior. And if you lived in the BattleTech universe, XLs are the upgrade to get. Same thing with like Pharaoh and Indo. There's no crit slots in BattleTech. That's in the universe. That's a
Right.
game mechanic to balance two tech bases. It's like, no, that's not how that works. All right, cool shots. I'm glad you guys brought this up because I remember having a podcast years ago when cool shots were introduced. And to go down a little bit of memory lane, for those that don't know, cool shots back in the day were a pay to win. You had different types. There was like 15, 30, and was it 90 or 60? There was multiple different ones. It's been so long since they had this, and it got a lot of blowback, so they changed it. But I remember having a podcast and Brian Ekman was there, and I was like, why did you
That's
introduce those when you guys have a game that finally heat seems to be like before double heat sinks and then before the clans, the game was a lot different, and you did have to like mind your heat. I remember the difference between the Jenners, the 7K or the 6K. Do you want 6 medium lasers or do you want 4 and an SRM4? One can alpha, but if you get pressed, then you're hosed.
Yeah.
One is more DPS, sort of, like, and so it's just one of those things where when they introduce cool shots, first off, it's like space magic because they didn't introduce a negative. It's not like you use it and then you have less dissipation rate because you're flushing coolant out of your mech, ergo your reservoir is going down. And once you run out of coolant in a car engine, do you know what happens? It's bad juju. I've thought Cool Shot was probably, and if not, one of the biggest power creeps to the game that got introduced outside of just clans, because it affects both, of course. You can remove them, right? You can change them so they do less, like less dissipation over time as well. You can make them so that when you use them, maybe there's just as equal like a negative thing as well. A lot of people don't like negatives, like a trade-off, because usually the trade-offs aren't worth what you get.
Right.
But how do you guys feel about them? I do think they've fundamentally changed the game, a lot. And so what are you guys looking? You said November. What are you guys thinking of doing with Cool Shots?
I think to go even further from where you went, I think you did a podcast with Paul, and he also, what did he bring in? He brought in the global cooldown for Cool Shots as well. I think that was a few years after that one.
I don't even remember.
It's a long time.
So, yeah, it's so you can't just boom 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 use.
Yeah, you can't just
time.
spam them.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That was
because like Living Legends had a good system, which was when you used all of your coolant, your dissipation went went to crap. So it was strategic. It was like, oh man, I really need to do this, and I think
an emergency, right?
I think 4 was like that as well. It's been so long since I played 4. I don't.
4
I know they had it. I know they had it. They had it.
They had coolant.
Yeah.
And I think MechTech, or I don't know if it was in the vanilla game or when MechTech got a hold of it, but they also added coolant pods.
Yeah.
Where you could, it was like 4 tons for extra coolant.
Yeah.
But I kind of like that idea because, it costs something. It wasn't just, oh, here, let me slap this on my mech. It cost me 2 points in the skill tree. Like, what? We went from this to, it was 4 tons. It took two spots in one of the pockets, and now I had to take less weapons. And, I had to sacrifice tonnage now, which it's free. It's like candy,
I've never asked,
everywhere.
but I would I'd put a good wager on that. When that was coming out, I have a feeling IGP was the World of Tanks sort of leftover like pay to win
Oh,
gold ammo at the time.
yeah.
I mean, you think about it, the time frame this was coming out, and monetize everything, right? And even
Mm.
if it adds power creep, like, hey, I mean, and there's still an option to use MC for it, which is again, it's
It's
one of
kind
those
of
things.
weird. It's like a legacy thing. We just,
Yeah,
I
there's
don't
a
know,
lot of
we can get rid
legacies.
of.
Yeah, yeah. So okay, so
Sorry to get
obviously
sidetracked.
outside of pods, which I think it would be a cool piece of equipment, but again, what that it's like the
Mm.
trade-off is tonnage and crit space. This is built in. So what are you guys looking? Are you guys looking at nerfing the amounts? The amount it dissipates, how long it dissipates.
I think our initial, thing. Well, Tio's brought it up. The initial idea was to spread out the amount of heat cooling, over time, basically. So like if you pump the cool shot now, I don't remember. It's like some duration, right? And we're thinking of extending the duration, but keeping the same amount of heat. So you would cool down slower, but it's still the same amount of heat. Just you reach that same amount at a different time. So instead of like coming out of cover maybe a second after you've popped the cool shot, it might take a couple of seconds to cool down and then come out and shoot somebody. But yeah, our initial idea was to just lengthen the time it took to get that amount of cooling.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Spread it out. So instead of like it being a 3 second duration where it's pretty quick, you're just stuff. It
Might take a
takes
little
longer.
while.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's needed, and I think you're right. It's in conjunction with the high alpha builds just being able, and I mean, we're all guilty of it. I think I went like a full 2 years before I actually used them. Like I was on my own little like
Hmm.
hill to die on. I was like, there's like but when all the kids are doing it, I guess. But okay, so that's pretty big news. And then of course of December you're looking at that. Um okay. Let me ask you a question. This is a side note. I know I think the outside of cool shots, I think the biggest introduction of a mechanic that has fundamentally changed the game. I guess two things. ECM and radar deprivation. And radar deprivation I feel like has fundamentally changed the game. Like
Yeah, it's a spicy thing because I think when I first started playing this game, I had no idea about modules. I was like, oh, why am I getting lermed? I'm in cover, and it's like, oh shit. There's this thing called radar depth and target decay. Back when we had modules, I was like, holy shit. That's why they have locks on me for so long. And my little peanut brain back then, I was always thinking it was just Mechwarrior 4, where you customize your mech and you go and play with it. And it's like, no, there's modules, there's all this other stuff going on. Yeah, I don't know. For me, it just seems like radar depth is one of those things that it could have been more particular with what mechs they gave it to, because now just everyone has access to it. And even worse, all the ECM mechs have radar dip plus the ECM, and now it's like, damn, now we really can't get a lock on them. Not only are they standing out in the open, I can't even lock onto them. It's like, wow, that's kind of broken, if you ask me. I really don't like the concept of ECM plus radar depth. Like it'd be nice to sort of separate those two, but I don't know if it's possible because there are omni-mechs that you can just switch pods, and now there's ECM on something with radar dip, and I'm not quite sure how that's gonna play out if, for example, we said, okay, if you have ECM, you can't bring radar dip, right?
yeah, I think for me it fundamentally changed how the game was played, and then it also has a side effect of it negatively affects any lock on ability. Now I understand this is a hot topic because LRM indirect fire, but it's killed streaks, it's killed LRMs, and because indirect and direct fire are tied together, on the back end, and that can't be fixed unless there's engineers, which right now there isn't. So to me, it's one of those things where I remember the game before radar deprivation, but ever since you just always take it. I mean, it's just that powerful, and then ECM. I just feel like those. It'd be interesting seeing movement on that and discuss. I know you guys have discussed a lot on the Cauldron, but like that would be an interesting. How do you unravel that? Now, how do you do it? Obviously, you could remove it from the skill tree, radar deprivation, and then I said this a few days ago. Like it was interesting. Paul was saying role warfare, and when he came out with the new skill tree, he pretty much allowed anybody to take anything, which sort of got rid of the whole idea of specialization.
Yeah, that kind of ruined it because now everyone's got radar depth. It's
and two strikes and two cool shots. Like it's like it was multiple steps back, not to mention user interface, but I just feel like how I look at it is I would rather radar depth, if I had a say in it, I would say I'd remove it from the skill tree and then put it on a quirk basis. That's what I would do. I'd use it as a specialization. I mean, think of mechs that really could use a little bit of love, and that's one of the GTFO factors. ECM, I feel that we had a PTS that never really got to see the light of day because of another mechanic that was introduced, but there was a PTS, so it means there was code written, and the mechanic was if you were standing in front of me like you are now, and after 3-4 seconds, you would become lockable. And that would sort of, I mean, it would help that. I mean, obviously, ECM itself, you could nerf the skill and then buff the equipment.
Change the nose.
Yeah, you can change the nose or whatever. I just feel like the fundamental, like, you're standing in the open, I can't do anything. Also, the having multiple layers, like if I have BAP and I'm shooting streaks at you, and I'm countering your ECM, and then your buddy with ECM comes up, I'm hosed. And I feel like that is a mechanic. I don't know if that can be altered as well, but that's another big like negative. Like,
that's one thing that always bugged me about it was like, if you have 2 ECM, you can cancel a Beagle active probe, and it's like, dude, what? You just shut down a mech for free just by standing next to it. It's like you didn't bring flamers, you didn't, remove anything from the mech. You're just standing next to it. And yeah, I always felt like there's, like, I guess the entire bubble system in general was just really weird. Because again, it's like if somebody's a missile boat or a streak boat or something, now they just can't play the game.
Stun locked, which is funny because Paul and them never wanted stun locked with like flamers or knockdown. But then, it's like this I mean, literally, there's nothing you can do. You can't even fire your weapons, and I just feel like that's something. I mean, and again, then you combine ECM and jump jets and, radar deprivation, and you've got to lock on someone because you're canceling them or you're tagging them. They hop behind cover just for, I mean, like they could pass a tree.
Yeah.
Boom, you lose your lock. Now you got to reacquire the lock, which, they've got a friend who's got them under ECM too. So that takes longer. And it's just, I just feel like there's nothing stopping me from putting, Gauss to your forehead and any other, there's no other, direct fire does not suffer from anything like that. And I feel like, lock on weapons do. And I just feel like it's like, and again, I give that you have to have consideration for any change you do to radar deprivation. You also have to look at target decay nodes because again,
that's a big thing.
LRM boats and that effect and that trickle down effect.
What if we removed ECM nodes and like radar depth and then left target decay? Now all of a sudden you've got another LRM apocalypse, right? Because now there's no way to break the lock unless like you're in cover and they just never see you. So,
and sometimes cover
spicy.
I got rained on. It was like 2-3 weeks ago, and I was behind cover, and those LRMs were still coming in, and I was like, "There's literally nothing I can do." Like,
the firing arc is pretty aggressive, I think.
Yeah, and I'm like, man, like, I mean, okay, I guess that's, all
Guess I'll die
fair, but
now.
yeah, it's like I have no option here. But okay, so uh, let's talk about some new weapons. Obviously, hags come in, and binary laser cannons and X pulse lasers. My initial impressions, hags felt pretty good. I do feel they're. It's always tough. I didn't feel like they were OP because everybody was using them because it was brand new. So everybody's going to be
Yeah,
testing them
I
out.
mean, the clan Gauss rifle
Yeah.
vanished overnight. It
I
was
mean,
incredible.
but that being said, what did you see? You basically saw them replace Gauss rifles, but the same builds with hags now. So that made them even more, they are a long range weapon. They're hot, generally speaking, or hotter than Gauss, obviously. But very, very effective. So I didn't think they were OP, but I felt like I can see them getting some changes. You guys made
Yeah.
changes to them. You changed the duration between the rounds going out. Um, you have some mixed opinions out there. I've sort of read is some people it's like, well, are you nerfed and buffed him at the same time? It's like, do you want a pinpoint long range weapon, or do you want to like spread? But here's the thing: is like, if you're moving and someone's shooting at you at 900, they're probably still not going to hit you with every single round. And
Yeah,
you're actually
that
probably better off with just Gauss rifles at that point if that's what you wanted.
mhm.
Yeah,
Like the main idea was that, initially it was the spread mechanic, right? And it had a low duration, but it was still, a fair duration of like, if you were moving fast at, 700 meters, you'd probably get dinged once or twice, no big deal. But it just, to me at least personally, it just replaced the Gauss rifle outright.
yeah,
Like all of a sudden, day one from patch, it's gone.
yeah.
Like when has a weapon been replaced like that almost
Well,
instantly?
and to be fair though, that you would replace it in the regard of if you've always taken like the Death Strike, dual Gauss,
Right,
whatever
right.
combo, you would have of course slapped, like, it's not like you could put four of them, so you would have replaced two of them, with
Mm,
hags just to test. So I feel like that happened and they were more pinpoint. Obviously, you guys broke that up,
right.
and I've started seeing regular Gauss come back because again, 15 pinpoint versus breaking that up.
And now
It's a
you've got
lot.
to lead longer. You've got to,
Yeah,
track a
yeah.
little better. And now it's like, oh shit, all my muscle memory is getting fucked up.
Yeah, and hags versus bigger mechs, awesome. Hags versus a locust or flea running around, not so good, right?
Yeah.
Especially, so
Now that it's, the damage is spread out
yeah, yeah,
over a few
yeah,
projectiles.
yeah.
Now it's like, lights OP again.
Yeah, I like I said, I feel like they're in a good place. I didn't think they were OP, but I could see the change. And it was weird though because it was a buff and a nerf on that second, and everybody's like, "What? They don't need a buff." And it's like, well, and I agree. So, um, binary laser cannons come out. Obviously, we have an error in the patch, which is it allows 3 to fire instead, which created some giga laser vomit setups out there. And I feel like unfortunately that didn't get hot fixed. So we lived with the month.
Yeah, we tried to get that hot fixed,
Yeah,
and we were just
yeah,
told no. And I was
yeah,
just like, damn, we
yeah.
got to live with that now.
So initial impressions, I think it's a good weapon system. I think it's here to stay. I there are a few bit like in Stalker 4N is one of those where like it's got 2 HSLs, so it's able to fire 4. But granted, it's hot. You're pushing the
Yeah,
envelope, right?
yeah. There are
But
some things that
it'll be interesting seeing it versus a clan mech come December. That's
mhm.
where they're going to be near on par. That's going to be interesting. Just that fight right there.
Yeah, just the idea that clans are suddenly capped on something, right? They're not just superior in every way. Now it's like, oh, this might
Or they're
be.
on par. I don't know if it's
Yeah,
like yeah. I mean, yeah.
but I
Um,
think I wanted
go
to
ahead.
bring something up about the binary laser cannon. Is that error in the HSL? It actually, we were looking at it and we were thinking there are a few mechs that got, I think, laser HSL the following patch when it was fixed. So I think the Dragon 1C you can still fire 3, but it's a dragon compared to say a stalker with like
Yeah.
laser HSL and large laser HSL. I mean that's gonna have to change obviously.
Yeah, I like HSL quirks. It's definitely helped the game because you can say, hey, these weapon combos are too OP, but hey, this mech, we're not worried about it
Yeah, it's
being,
got like 3 hard points.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
not too spicy.
yeah. X pulse lasers, they come out.
Oh man.
They're, I feel like they ran into a few problems here. The first problem is I was treating them like pulse lasers. The other problem is they were really hot. The issue, and then they got patched. And one thing that Magic, I was watching him play, shout out Magic Penglove again. He described to me, he was drawing on a screen and stuff. He was like, they are a push weapon, just like a rack. He was like, you can't poke out, fire, twice and then go back. You're gonna literally not. You can do that with pulse. You can do that with regulars. He's like, you can't do that. It's a sustain. You need to be able to, like, you're committing to the fight when you're using them. And as soon as I started playing with that, I was using the Hunchback 4P and a few others, saw some good performance out of them as far as medium X pulse. Small X pulse haven't used. Large X pulse. In general, I feel like I don't mind the face time per se. It's just they don't do. I know there's a buff coming. I think like a 0.2 damage buff on the large pulse maybe. I just feel like they're still very hot. But my thoughts are it's a very thin line where if you guys cross it, they're going to be OP.
Oh yeah, I mean,
and like
it's with every new weapon. It's like,
yeah,
man, look at that one entry input error. Suddenly VLCs, you can fire 3 of them, and it's like, oh my god, what's happening? There are 5 binary laser cannon stalkers running around, like one-shotting limbs off.
Yeah.
And that happened to me. I think I was in a summoner and my leg just got ripped off. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is nice.
Yeah. And of course, mechs that can abuse the X large pulse are usually bigger and they can fit 4. There's a few mechs with large pulse. Like, there's a few out there that, again, can lay it down. But overall, like, I think a good introduction. I mean, I know you guys have I asked, are you guys opposed to adding, there's a few other weapons in the time frame that you guys could add, and you guys were saying this was basically a test bed, sort of see how they went. I mean, I feel like they've been pretty well received. I mean, you see hags everywhere, you see, binaries everywhere. X-Pulse, you still see people like testing them around, but they're not a mainstream yet.
It's getting there.
Yeah.
Because like currently it's just a big machine gun, and it's like, machine guns have always been complementary weapons. It's not like, you boat machine guns unless you have a shitload of them, right? Yeah. And it's like, with X-Pulse, they're really heavy. They take 2 slots, and those are laser weapons you could be using. And it's like now you're just a big machine gun, a very big slow machine gun, and it's always been my issue with it. I mean, paired with racks, it's okay, but again, like you said, it's a very thin line because, we could go from, oh yeah, you have to take this with DACA to, oh, just boat it. It's fine. You can just kill everything with it. And yeah, we're sort of approaching it, but I don't think we're there. I think it could use another tweak or 2. I don't know. I feel like less heat would be good on top of the new damage coming in, just to see, did we go too far? Did we not go far enough? I've never really seen X-Pulse as a mainstay weapon because, the damage to, staring ratio is just so low. It's like you have to sit there and really, stare at someone for a few seconds and have,
But if you're going to commit the tonnage to him, again, just because of the nature of the beast, it's like your primary and or large secondary weapon. I mean,
yeah, that's 7 tons. It's very big, especially on an IS mech. It's not like we have mixed tech and you can stick this on a clan mech that has, tons of space.
I think
it makes it worse.
Also, too, is when that change in December comes, I think just the gameplay, I'm really intrigued with that because I feel like, man, that December potentially is a huge just sort of shift, like I was saying, with some that capability of like skirmish, being able to, you're not taking those alphas and some fun gameplay I think is going to happen with. I feel like that change is good for the game. I think there will be people that don't like it, and that may be also me. I don't
Well,
know.
of
We'll
course.
find out because I do love
Your favorite
my
toys are getting messed with.
yeah. But I think it's better for the game and will lead to the other side because if you're an IS player mainly, then it's not fun, or even if you're not, like even if you're like a light or medium pilot, it's not fun like poking out and just wall and that's how like that's not cool either. Let me ask you about maps because I feel like the imbalances in quick play, and which is what I play. I'm not going to speak for faction play, but for quick play, um, groups obviously, but matchmakers a whole nother podcast we can do.
Yeah, it's a fun one.
But maps, I feel like, as I said, I think weapons are in a pretty good place, and max balance for the most part is in a pretty good place. The issue I feel like right now that sort of exacerbates any imbalances that you may have with groups, of course, or weapons or mechs, is the maps. And in particular, like I know we've talked about Emerald Vale. I like Emerald Vale as a map, but it has clear balance issues where the sides, the ramps that go up on both sides. Same thing with like HPG. I don't mind having that, but when you have sightlines that are over a kilometer and there's mechs that can engage that at that range, and I just feel like, is there any feedback that you guys have got, Kraz? Is Kraz open to making change? Because either you drop down or I feel like also when I talked to him, it was sort of frustrating because it was like Free Worlds League Coliseum.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, hey man, like this map has huge balance issues, huge sight lines, and you're wondering why people are frustrated. It's because you've created a long range map that long range, there's no drop. Like you just go up there and you can start tagging people and there's nothing they can do. And it's like, I have no problem with long range maps if you can pick your map ahead of time, but you can't. Right. Or you can pick your mech ahead of time, sorry, but you can't. So I feel like it's his responsibility. Yes, not all maps need to be short range brawl maps where there's so much cover you can't. But I use Rubelite as an example. You can do long, you can do short, you can do medium, you can skirmish, you can flank left, right. There's verticality to it. And I feel like that's a good example of a designed map that allows flexibility for engagements. And I feel like Free Worlds League, even though the big tower things, it's, whatever. But like Emerald Vale, if you take a long range mech and you go up there, you have a good chance of doing a lot of damage. And there's really, the only thing that's going to counter you is if they have a group that pushes up there.
Unless it's a full commit to your position. Then it's like, you can just stay there. Unless someone's trading with you.
HPG, there's too much cover up on the rim that and it'll be interesting though, because I say this, but some of them, biggest, alpha games, Direwolves, Mark IIs and stuff like that, if they're going to be able to get pressed, but still, again, so their alphas get reduced, but it's just one of those things where, am I crazy in thinking, like, I've had this discussion, like, that just makes those playstyles strong, and the majority of how many maps can you drop with a long range setup like that? I mean, Vitric, there's sniper spots right next to the spawns. HPG, Emerald Vale, Frozen City. I mean, there's Solaris, but Canyon Network, there's a few spots that you can sit into. Echo 5, the bridge, and then dumpster area. But more often than not, I mean, if you roll your dice and you're taking these long setups and you're in a group, you can sort of dictate the range. And I just feel like maps are a big issue as far as balance. And I'm not asking for like HPG. I think you could take away some of the cover. I mean, he added it up there. I feel like he could take some of that away. But like, am I crazy in saying that like they are problematic?
But I think the biggest thing you'll notice is it's either there's lots of cover on the higher positions, or the map is just shaped like a bowl, right? And we've gone, I think, ad nauseum about this in the Cauldron, in other discords about, maps that are shaped like bowls because, you come at a spawn, there's a power position, and you don't move any further. You can just move one grid square, and then you're in this power position, and now you've got three of your friends with you sitting there. And, that's a majority of the tonnage. That's and if you're all set up for long range, it's like, what are they going to do? You're just playing tower defense at that point. And yeah, my frustration is that even in comp matches, you see people like sitting in long range mechs just at the edge of the map, just casually farming people as they're trying to fight their other seven constituents, and it's like this is to me personally this is boring. It's boring to go onto Canyon Network and go down Delta 4 towards Epsilon and have to worry about some guy in the junkyard, some guy sitting on a hill somewhere, and it's like, dude, I brought SRMs, and like the casual player, doesn't know what's around the corner. It's like direwolf, blue lasers. That's the main complaint. It's like, damn, you know,
Yeah.
what happened to the part of the map that we could fight over? Now it's just like this one individual or these particular set of individuals have just shut down an entire row of the map basically.
Yeah. I mean, again, I sort of look at it as
Mm,
it's okay to have sightlines, but if that's the dominant thing on the map, then of course what's going to happen is like that's going to be the dominant, ability.
yeah,
And it'd be one thing if you could pick your map or mech before your map, but you can't. So there should be options and um
just on the outside, it's like the approach to these positions, there's just no cover. It's like, okay, there's the spawns, there's the power positions, and then there's no man's land, and then there's cover to fight over in the middle. And in that space, oh, say we want to approach these people or try and get into weapons range with them, and it's like we're already dead at 600 meters. It's like, why would we even bother?
how do you feel about the latest map?
What was the latest map?
Series Metalworks or the
Oh,
Scrapyard?
series. Yeah, I feel like um, for me, it's more so that you just I think we saw it day one. Someone got in a blue laser Gauss mech and just sat on a hill and just shot people, and I was like, damn, I wish these hills were a little higher. That way I could have some approach to them. But it's like you either play their game or you just get farmed, and it's like, yeah, there are spots for, potential brawls to happen in these really deep, gorges, but that's not the whole map. It's like if someone sits on a hill, they can see across the entire thing. And it's like, well, that was fun for a second until I had to come out of cover.
Yeah.
It just again, it just frustrates me that, it's I feel like there's too much just stuff straight out of spawn that is given to a player that they can just take advantage of. And I mean, for me, it's like I either have to play mid range or I have to play a pop tart or I have to play blue lasers to even just help the other guys that are playing an Atlas from 3025 or some crazy nonsense about SRMs. And it's like, do I sit here with them and listen to them complain, or do I try and help them and try and counter what's going on? And it's like, nah, this is good luck against four people.
Yeah, I like the new map. I think the first thing I thought was it was a little bit too dark.
Yeah, it was really dark.
And that'll lead into something the next sort of thing that we can talk about. But I feel like I like it. I think that it's a little bit too dark. There's a lot of junk that you can like not shoot. I know that he's working on that, so there's that. But I get it. You want to create an atmosphere and stuff like that. But overall, to me, I actually don't mind it. I've had some pretty diverse like. Are we fighting in the center? Are we going left or right? Yeah, like I don't think it's. I think because of the lack of visibility, you don't have like predictable like spots you go to, like on Canyon Network or whatever. Like,
Yeah, it's very, like there are paths to the enemy spawn without them seeing you.
yeah,
And I do like that, but it's like if only the entire map were that way, where okay, I could run into the center and fight in the center and not be afraid of, say the guy standing in the back shooting me in the ass because I'm trying to sneak around and kill his friends or something. And it's like, yeah, I feel like it's got potential there. It feels like a better Canyon network almost.
Yeah, it's definitely different. I like it. Let's talk about visibility. User.cfg changes. I watched DRAM's video. For those that aren't aware, DRAM's got a video. You should go watch. You guys are obviously aware of this. I wasn't to the extent that the CFG. I didn't know the CFG can do some of the things that GRAM pointed out.
Oh yeah, it can like water disappears.
Yeah,
foliage is gone. Yeah,
but dark maps aren't dark after this, and that's one of the things that was frustrating too. Was with the new map was, and this has been my argument. And by the way, if you use these, you're not a bad person. I'm not calling you a bad person. My frustration is I don't turn my game up and I don't turn my brightness up and I don't change my user CFG file. So I am at a disadvantage against people that do change their user CFG file. So when I saw, because I think it was, I don't know if it was it was someone, I popped into another streamer's channel and they were like, it might have been G. On screen, what we were watching was a dark. He was like, but that's not what I'm seeing. And he switched to his vision, and I think it's a filter or whatever. And it was a lot brighter. And so I was saying is like, basically what you're doing is you're making the map easier to see. And that's my argument is if a very competent player is doing that as an advantage, then my argument is the map shouldn't be that dark in the first place, because it's just putting everybody else at a disadvantage that doesn't know about user CFG and or NVIDIA filters or whatever you're doing. I feel like that's a disadvantage. How do you feel about it? What is the interaction between you and PGI about it? And yeah.
Well, I think it's in a gray area because they haven't explicitly stated it's not allowed, but they also haven't, endorsed it, right? It's like you can change the config files on your side of the client, right? And for me, it's just like, I've been playing comp for years and years before this whole debacle of CFG, NVIDIA filters. Before any of that happened, all I would do is turn the settings to low, keep I think it was the particles to high, the shadows to medium, and the textures to very high. And that was really it. Like that was the only thing you really did in the game files, because I guess we were very ignorant to the fact that you could change the CFG file. But I think this is a very recent thing, and I guess me personally, how I feel about it, I think it's kind of stupid. Honestly, it's like you have to go beyond the game settings to get an advantage, and it really only helps you so much, right? I mean, yeah, you can see further, there's no fog, but it's like, what's it worth? What's it worth opening the game files, trying to tinker with things, and then...
Well, if it's the worth is to win, and it helps you be able to see better, which is a big deal. I mean...
I think the mentalities differ there. I used to play comp. I quit, I think, this past year. I was like, I'm over it. I'm done playing, competitive, blah, blah, blah. But
I mean, you can quit comp, but comp doesn't.
Comp can't quit you. No, of course. The
I
mentality of winning all the time, it stays.
But that's if you can get an advantage, and that's, by the way, I had no idea it was that extreme on Viridian Bog and that stuff. I was like, holy crap, all the things just disappeared.
Lily pads are gone.
Like, and because sometimes it's funny because like sometimes you'll get hit and you're like, how the hell did
they can see
me? Shit. And then this comes out, and then it makes you question like, hey.
Yeah, what else is going on?
Same thing with like on a dark map or whatever. I'm like, oh yeah, it's because there's people that can just tell it's not that dark to them. And
I've even asked the question to like Tios a few times. I was like, hey, what if we just change the stock standard CFG to like include some of these quality of life things? Because I mean, what he showed us was a really extreme like config edit, like textures disappeared, foliage disappeared, water disappeared, but behind all of that is like there are FPS improvements that we could take into account. I mean, yeah, you could brighten up a few maps. That's no big deal. But I mean,
The
for me,
LODs. I want the
yeah,
LOD. I think I'm gonna do
exactly.
the LOD thing. Yeah.
It's like behind the extremes is like, hey, that's something that's really helpful. And it's like, why don't we just update the config file to that level instead of, having this massive difference? Now it's kind of a difference, it's kind of an advantage, but it's like you don't have to go through all those hoops to get, just the benefits, right?
Yeah, the LOD one, I just specifically remember like you can be about 300 meters away from the Citadel and it starts its LOD process. So it looks like a
Oh
bag of
God.
ass. And like it looks so bad when you're up at like dropship that you can see through it. And those are LODs. And it's like, I'm 700 meters away. Why does it look like that? Like, and so for me at least, it's like I'm okay with it using a little bit more memory, and
Hmm.
so it just looks good at all ranges.
Yeah, I think there's
Um,
also another spot in Solaris. I think if you're like 100 meters, there's like this grading, looking towards one of those ramps, and it'll just disappear. You'll walk back 5 meters, it's gone, and then you'll try and shoot through it, and it's like, oh wait, hold on, let me go 5 meters.
yeah,
No, there it is again, and it's like,
yeah,
dude, what, what is this?
yeah.
So yeah,
It's
I mean, there's some benefit to it, but yeah, I wouldn't. I just don't see the point in going to those extremes when you can just turn the settings to low. I mean, the game
gotcha.
looks like shit, but
Understood. Um, what else is there going on in the cauldron? Do you think that maybe the large community at large doesn't really understand or know about the group?
well, I think is just I feel like a lot of people misunderstand that when one cauldron member speaks, they don't speak for the entire cauldron. I think that's been a big thing, especially with some of the rumors that are spreading. It's like, oh, JGX this, JGX that, ruin the game, runs the cauldron, blah blah blah. And it's like, if you really sit there and listen to some of these or read some of these conversations, it's like, what Dario thinks or what Krasnopesky thinks or what I think is like vastly different. We're individuals there. I always believed that the cauldron extended beyond just tags because we have people from EMP, we have people from 228, we have people from JGX. And even before that, what about all the teams they've been on? What about, Navid being in Dropship 5, me being in EMP for a short time, Bowser being in EMP? And it's like, what the heck? I think that's one thing that really kind of, I guess it doesn't frustrate me, but it's like, when someone takes say MPG's word as law and then runs with it to another server and starts spreading rumors, it's like, damn, that was fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So again, that's why I also feel like it's important to like do this, and maybe we'll do it once a month, maybe, something like that, just to sort of tackle what's going on in the game right
Mm-hmm.
now. Especially, after patches, sometimes there's, and of course, like talking about like a big change. Like I just felt like when I heard about the change to clans, I was like, okay, I'm pretty well in the know as far as the community, I like to think. I mean, like, and
Mm-hmm.
if I'm going no, I don't, there's, they're gonna do what? Like, so obviously my part, joining the Discord, I'll be in there. I can't participate in majority of stuff, but maybe I can catch here or there. And, and I know, again, I have my opinions about things, but at the end of the day, I'm not, I don't have the time, I guess, sometimes to like
I mean,
my
consider
discussions are on stream usually. Like that's
right.
where my rants are. Like I'll be like, oh, like, and we'll go for like half an hour rant. But um
Just consider that like outside of in the cauldron, it's like we have people that are teachers, electrical engineers, and so on and so forth. It's like we have lives outside of you know well, for me it's like college, and it's like we all have lives outside of this. We
yeah,
can't be there 100%. And I mean, I think we'd love to, but we're doing this for free. Like
yeah,
mech packs and legendary pack, they don't pay the bills. They
yeah,
don't put food on the table, and they don't further our education. So it's like, I like personally, I won't push anyone to do anything that I wouldn't do. Right? It's like if I'm going out of my way for something, it has to be worth it. because, this is just a hobby. We love this game, but again, it's like we have day jobs. We're just regular people at the end of it. And I think I get the frustration of like not being able to communicate with us, but it's also the fact that, you know, it's like, man, I mean, all of us wish we could be here every day, but we just, life didn't work out for us that way.
Yeah. And then how many ideas do you hear or see that have no place, or the person doesn't really understand the mechanics behind what they're asking, and then what the like knockdown effects would be, like, oh, why
Right.
don't you just do this? And it's like, okay, let's entertain that, but do you understand it's going to affect this, this, and this? Or they don't understand too. I've heard this before, like, you know, let's, back in the day, like, let's add a bloom reticle or some type of system in this, in the context was like, their thoughts were it'll curb those, good players are just really good because of PPFLD, pinpoint front load damage.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, let's go down this rabbit hole. All you're doing is nerfing yourself because it's a mechanic that they're going to be really good at because they're just good. And now they've got it's just another skill gap that is going to be added to it. I mean, even people don't like sometimes hearing this, like Gauss cooldown, whether you agree with it from a balance perspective, it's a skill, being able to like charge and let go and stuff like that on the move, on the fly, using your, arm reticle versus, I mean, all that stuff.
Yeah,
It's
all
a
that
skill.
stuff
It's a
takes
skill.
time.
How many of you guys struggle with that? And so then, my point being is, there's a lot of ideas out there, but I think a lot of the time people just want to rant, and sometimes they want to be heard, but it doesn't necessarily, like, I have opinions all the time. Doesn't mean any of them are any good, or should be listened to. Sometimes it's just words and I'm talking and blah blah blah. But my point being is like, I know it's difficult taking in all the feedback, and some of that feedback is irrelevant, and people don't
Right.
like to hear that. And obviously you guys aren't saying like, oh, you're an idiot, shut up. But yeah, when it comes to like balance of the game, I think a lot of people just don't understand the nuances. And then the big thing is, how many suggestions require PGI having engineer resources? And
Oh man,
and and
it's a long list.
yeah, but I mean, that's the thing, is like, you guys are working with what you got,
Yeah,
and the
and
constraints
right
that you
now
have.
we don't have any engineers.
Yeah.
And I think that's the frustrating thing is like we've been saying we don't have engineers for how long? Since it started, basically.
The only time you guys got them was technically with skill tree revamp, July of
Yeah, that was it.
2022.
And that was basically it. Like ever since, Matt's been, doing his damnedest to try and find people to like, work with what we have here, but you know, like Tios was basically a Hail Mary, he popped up. He's a 3D modeler, but he's also very curious about what's going on under the hood, and he's wearing multiple hats right now. And I don't want to toot my own horn here, but you should see the conversations between him and Navid. It's kind of hilarious because Navid has all this stuff to offload to him, and he's like, okay, well, I can investigate, this, and this. And sometimes he comes back and says, I don't know what the fuck that is. I can look at it for a few days, but it's like I can't do anything with it. Or he'll say, well, I can manipulate this. What kind of variables are we testing? That's how we got to the cool shot, the clan double heatsink thing. And it's like, yeah, there are just some things like, matchmaking, some UI changes that, are just beyond his capability. But, hats off to the guy because he's a 3D modeler.
Yeah.
He's on the way of, investigating new weapons. Like all this new stuff happened because of him. It wasn't like, Navid got, a marionette and put it into PGI, but it kind of sucks for the guy because he's the only one, juggling all those hats. And it's like, man, when he gets flamed about stuff, I'm just like, you guys have no idea. You guys have no idea how much that sucks.
Yeah. And again, I'm guilty of like, because I'm a player, I'm just like, I'll have opinions or whatever, but usually it's like, yeah, you guys are are doing your best. I mean, and you guys have introduced like the sets of 8, 6, and 4. I think that's a really cool idea, by the way, and I'd like to see
Yeah.
it spread to, like, because what that allows you to do is there's a lot of omnipod and omnipod combinations, or like sets of 4 and 6 that wouldn't break anything. So
Right.
you could introduce those, and I know that was with the scale shot, which seems to be very OP and a little bit
Well,
broke in my
I think
opinion.
the issue is with the set of 4, 6, and 8 is they stack.
Yes.
So that's why it's so fucking broken. Is because like, oh yeah, there's cooldown, then there's spread, then there's ammo, and it's like, oh my
You have to be
goodness.
very careful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember quirking the summoner, and the idea in my head was like, oh, okay, like, yeah, the prime, we can buff the PPC and we can buff the LB. And then all it really did was, oh, they're taking the left right torso energy and doing a pop tarting ERPPC, like summoner, and they're getting the
From the
bonuses from
torsos.
arm.
Yeah.
Whereas if you had a set of 8, you could do that, and then you could, like you could, yeah, and
Decouple
so
things as we go.
yeah, and some mechs and some combos, again, you can add some flair or some bonuses too, and even if it doesn't have to do with the stock necessarily loadout. But yeah, I like that mechanic that you guys introduced. I mean, the scale shot, like I said, is a little bit broke right now.
It's a decent concept, but yeah, like the scale shot, if the bonuses didn't stack, I think it would have been fine. But now that the set of 8, 6, and 4, it's like, oh shit, now we have 3 times the quirks on a single mech, and it's like, uh-oh.
Yeah, I think the one thing I noticed, it was funny, is I was getting pop tarted by one, and because of the ranged missiles, I mean, they're over 300, 400.
Yeah,
And
it's weird.
and because it's such a small mech, it popped up, and I'm basically being pop tarted now by SRMs, which do a lot of, and I'm just like, man, we've traded ER peeps for basically a like,
Yeah, right.
like, I'm being pop tarted by SRM Viper, and there's nothing I can do. There's literally
Like
nothing I can
400
do.
meters with SRMs, like,
Just,
oh my god.
yeah, it's like, but yeah, man,
I've seen a 4-man of those run around, and it's just like, dude, there's nothing you could do. You look at them and you're dead.
yeah, but yeah. All right, man. Well, we got to do this again. Again, I think maybe just once a month, just to sort of talk about what's going on in a month now. You guys may, and again, is there anything coming in October that we should know about? Heads up or anything like that?
I
That
think before this started, I asked Tios and Navid what I could talk about, and I think you caught us a little early. So I mean, October will come, and the conversation will start for November. The conversation for the November stuff is happening, but it's like, I think October is just, if I remember correctly, I think there's heat changes for hags, for the hag 30 in particular, and there's the damage for the large X pulse going up. I don't know, those are the ones off the top of my head, and then our regular quirk shenanigans. But yeah, that's kind of it for October.
no new map.
Well, I mean, I don't know about new maps because
Oh,
we haven't heard from the map guy in a while, and
gotcha.
it's concerning, but I also trust the guy, because he's been making maps, and you
Well,
can see like his
Darren said he's
iterations.
making a new map.
Yeah,
Darren
he's
said that publicly, I think. So,
passed the name by us, I think,
mm,
a month ago. Yeah, and
okay,
that was
all
kind
right.
of it.
Keep your
I
secrets. Well,
Yeah,
that's cool.
always begging him. It's like, hey, come on, when am I gonna get a snowy mining collective? Like
Yeah,
that's the dream.
yeah,
But yeah, he just is always very how do I say? He's to himself, which
gotcha,
isn't a bad thing, but it's like a little bit of information would help.
gotcha. All right, well, Kraz, if you're listening to this, talk more. Um, thank you, Bear Claw. Thank you for your time.
Welcome.
We'll do this again in a month, maybe a little bit. We'll, like time frame wise, we'll come up with something
We'll figure
for
something out.
November and then December, and then yeah, I'd like to continue this because I feel like, again, it's good to hear directly from you guys what you're feeling, and why. And again, I asked you guys on stream, and you guys were basically saying like alphas have been out of control for a while, especially on the client side of things, and it needs to be curbed, and this is a way of doing it. So I guess we're gonna be the guinea pigs. We're gonna have to give feedback. So if you're listening to this, I guess words of caution would be, don't think the sky is falling. This isn't the end of the world, but I actually can see
Or
where
is
they're
it?
going. Or is it? It may not work. It may not. That's fair. But I guess talking to you, what I'm getting is like, you're at least attempting something. We can't get a PTS because we don't have engineers. So it's either do nothing or do something, and maybe it shakes things up for a bit, and yeah, we'll go from there. But yeah. Any last words?
Well, just keep your eyes open, you know? Discussions are happening. We do have a feedback Discord. I know it's not very, you know, publicized, but it's there. It
I'll
exists.
have a link in the description. Like, so
Yeah,
if you
you
go
can even
down,
ping us if you want to in the Discord. So yeah. Ever feel
awesome.
like bugging me, just at Bearclaw.
Gotcha. Well, thank you, man. I do appreciate it, and I'll see you probably tomorrow on the internet.
Yep.
Stuff like that. Thanks, man.
See ya.